Welcome back. It's another fabulous Tuesday, and I'm here in my favorite sweater that I made during the sew along this week, and I had a whole bunch of fun with a bunch of my EAM friends. I'm glad you all came back for another Tuesday. I have some more reviews for you, but first, let's talk about some questions that I've been asked. What is a seam allowance? Why do some patterns not have a seam allowance? How can I add a seam allowance? Do I have to have a seam allowance? And how do I even know if a seam allowance is included in my pattern? And the last question would be, what tools can help me do that for myself? I'm Nye with Ellie and Mac, and I hope that I can answer those questions for you in this video. Come along. Some people might ask, Nye, what is a seam allowance? Well, a seam allowance is the area of fabric between the edge and the stitching line on two or more materials or fabrics that are sewn together. What that means, essentially, is that little frayed edge beyond your stitch line. Usually, a seam allowance is about 1/4 inch to 5/8 inch, with curves being a little bit smaller, or they'll have you snip your seam allowance a little bit shorter on the curves to prevent gathering of fabric and bunching. Do I have to have a seam allowance? If you're sewing clothing, absolutely. Because if you don't have a seam allowance, you don't have a seam. Imagine your fabrics being butted up against one another, edge to edge. Oh no, Nancy, your clothes are gonna fall off. That's exactly what's gonna happen if you don't have a seam allowance. So yes, you absolutely must have a seam allowance. What does a seam allowance do? Well, a seam allowance gives you a little bit of wiggle room. No pun intended. Okay, pun intended. A seam allowance gives you a little bit of space. Sometimes you just need that little 1/4 inch to make an item fit just right. Sometimes you need more seam allowance because what if you're doing French seams and you have to flip your fabric inside out to enclose that seam allowance? Well, that helps because that's all included. Sometimes you're making fabric, or you're making not fabric. Are you making fabric? If you're making fabric, we're in the wrong video. Sometimes you're making clothing for somebody else and you need to have a little bit of wiggle room just in case the item doesn't quite fit and you just want that perfectly fitted top, dress, pants, what have you. You need a seam allowance for that. Why do companies not include a seam allowance? I used to get super perturbed about that. Like, why is there no seam allowance? I don't understand. And the reason why is because, like I said earlier, if you're sewing for someone other than yourself, you might just need to have a little bit of extra give. Whereas even if they had a seam allowance, you might end up adding more anyway. So they give you that option right off the bat to add the seam allowance that you need. Just in case you decide you want to enclose those seams and use a pretty French seam, which happens to be one of my favorites, you're gonna need a larger seam allowance for that. Some of you may be beginners and you might say, oh gosh, Nye, how do I even know if my pattern includes a seam allowance? Well, I have the answer for you. Most patterns that include a seam allowance will have that information clearly written in the instructions. This is one reason why it's so important to read through the pattern before you begin. This way, you know exactly what to anticipate when you print and cut out your fancy little garment pattern that you're so excited about, and you don't end up like nice eyes in tiny shirt. Last but not least, let's talk products. The Singer Flippin Mark. The Singer Flippin Mark retails on Amazon for $9.81. It has two, not one, but two little blades. I like the way you can fold. Singer is so good about this folding and putting away stuff. Y'all, look. Folding and putting away. You know this is my favorite. You know I love this stuff. I'm a big fan of things that fold and I can put them away. In any case, it has one wheel. Oh, of course, I'm gonna leave a video here for you to see. One wheel is flat and one is dashed. I would be very careful because the straight wheel is kind of sharp and you might cut yourself. So what you would do is you would actually use this handy dandy tool, have a cutting mat or protected surface, because if you rub this on your table, you will have like nicks and things in it, okay? So what you basically would do if you were going to add a seam allowance is you would run this, or excuse me, let me start. You would sandwich. First, you would have your cutting mat, and then you would have your fabric wrong side up. Do not do this on the right side. You will be sad, Nancy. I'm sorry if your name is Nancy. I just really like to say Nancy. You put your fabric wrong side up. You put your tailor paper on top, which is kind of like, it's like inked on one side and not inked on the other side. So, and then you put your pattern on top of that. And then you run this along your pattern. Now what happens is, it actually will give you the space between the blades would be your added seam allowance. The upside for this is that you have the straight and the dashed. So you know which one is the actual pattern and which one is the seam allowance. Downside is you really can't switch the two. So I found that on one side of my pattern I had dashed and on the other side I had straight, because I didn't realize that that was going to be the case. Another downside for this item is that you don't get to choose your seam allowance with this. You get what they give you. So like my mom would say, you get what you get and you don't throw a fit. I threw a little tantrum. In any case, this is a really good item. I feel like it's durable. The wheels are a little bit wobbly, so it's a little difficult to get used to. So I'm gonna give this a 4 out of 5 stars because it works. It does what it says. It doesn't have a whole lot of options, but it does what it says. 4 out of 5. The next item I have here, and this is probably gonna be my favorite. This is a Clover double tracing wheel. This double tracing wheel is amazing. It's very simple. I like that it's wide so I can grasp it really well with my hand. I kind of wish it had a little bit like rubber grips on it, but still it's very easy to hold. You'll see in the video that these two wheels are removable, very easy to remove. It has measurement markings all the way across, so you can essentially go from a very wide seam allowance to a very, very narrow seam allowance in seconds. They are not sharp, so you are not going to tear up your fabric with these. They are blunted blades. They're easy to use. It does what it says. It's very sturdy. These wheels don't wobble. It's a very well made tool. This retails for $8.40 on Amazon. This little guy, 5 out of 5. Because even as a beginner at tracing my seam allowance, I had a good time with this tool and I have no complaints. 5 out of 5. Whoop! I almost put it in the notice board. What was I thinking? Lastly, I have the PRYM parallel tracing wheel. This little wheel is so, I just spit across the room. This little wheel is so much fun. Now, I love that it has this little measurement cap. You can choose to use this or not, or break it like I just did. Did I break it? No. Anyways, you can choose to use this piece or not. You can actually take the cap off, and it has a little wheel on it. Look, easy peasy lemon squeezy. And you can put that lemon in your tea. Ha! Anyway, so it's so easy to use, and you can take it apart, which I will show you in the video, and it has this little chalk cartridge of little ground up like chalk particles, and it just, you can use this like a little pen. Like I would use this for a whole bunch of reasons. I mean, I wish I had known this was around when I was doing my fabric marking video, because this is amazing. In any case, so you can put it back in its little pod, or you can choose to take it out and you can insert it into the little, sorry, wrong way, into the little wheel. And then you can move this little wheel out and close and back and forward. And then you will hold this up against your pattern edge, and this will trace as far as you need your pattern allowance or your seam allowance. The only thing about this is that, I mean, the very start, that's a really, really large seam allowance. I mean, really large. And it came with instructions, but the instructions were in like 5 other languages, so I couldn't read them. But I still feel like the tool was amazing. I had a good time using it. I would buy it even if it was just to use the chalk part by itself. It's heaven. And it marks dark fabrics because it's chalk, and it wipes away almost effortlessly. You'll see in the video that I used a little bit of dark fabric from the Style Magnolia to make it, and that's an athletic fabric. And usually when marking athletic fabric, it stretches out of the way because of the pressure that I have to put to mark it. But with this chalk, I had absolutely no problem. Now, you do have to be very careful because this wipes away very easily. And you might mark your things and then turn around and touch it and then the markings are gone. So that would be a down point too. So I would say overall, for just general purposes, I would give this a 5 out of 5. But since we're rating it as a seam allowance additive, then I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5. $5.99 of shipping. How messed up is that? Anyway, I have a little bit of a bonus add to my video. I know that I usually just do tool reviews, but I had some other things that I thought were pretty awesome, and I wanted to share them with you. The first thing, because I'm extremely thrifty, I like a sale. Pretty soon, the holidays are going to be over, and those sales of this wrapping paper is going to be insane. You are going to want to be out there grabbing all of this stuff, because if you're one who is constantly tracing your master patterns, y'all, it just goes on forever. And these sometimes after the holidays are like $1, or you can go to the dollar store and get a roll for $1. And on top of that, can we talk about how this already has grid squares on it? Can we talk about how this wrapping paper already has 1-inch grid squares? So guess what? If you're using a projector, you can match this up with your projector and trace that pattern on this paper and be like, yes, I know it's perfect because my grid square says so. This is amazing stuff. It's affordable, and it's very easy to trace a pattern onto gift wrap. This is called Oly Fun. This stuff is what they use to make reusable gift bags. This is what I trace my master patterns on, and I'll show you one in a second. But let me tell you something. This is extremely durable fabric. You can get it wet because although it's not water repellent, it's water resistant. So if you happen to spill your coffee on it, folks, it'll be fine. You can roll it up as tiny as you like. If this is how you want to store your patterns that you rock on. I mean, you could do that because you can even take a very light iron to it. Now, it's quiet. It's not loud and crumply like paper. And you can fold it and you don't have to worry about it getting ripped or torn on the folds where you fold paper. So if you have patterns that you use often, or if you have a pattern that you just really want to have the master set aside so you can pull it when you need it, Oly Fun is a really good option. I love hanging out with you. I have my tea, which is mint tea. I also love lemon ginger. Do you have a favorite? Tea is my bag at night, but in the morning, it's coffee time. Oh, where did that come from? I hope you had a wonderful Tuesday. I hope you enjoyed the rest of your week. I hope the weather is glorious where you are. I hope that you wake up with all the reasons to smile every day this week. I hope you come back next week to see what I'm up to so we can hang out. Have a wonderful day. You know you want to say it.